What if the rules of creativity are meant to be broken? That's what we're talking about in this video. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rich. I'm going to tell you a little story. When I was a teenager, I did art GCSE, which was, for those of you who don't live in the UK, was the exams you sit when you're 15, 16 as qualifications. And one of my subjects was art. And back then I was obsessed with shading, like pencil shading, and specifically smudging. And I would do that smudging whenever I could. So that's what smudging is, when you shade with a pencil and then you rub it with your finger so it looks all smooth. And I absolutely loved this stuff. I absolutely loved it. Even if the brief was do cross-hatching, I'd still sneak in a little bit of that smudging stuff. And I remember my teacher would not give me the marks I wanted. I was quite an egotistical child, so I assumed I would get A+ top marks. So when I got a B, I'd be like, I'd throw my toys out of the pram. And I remember one week I walked into the classroom to pick my sketchbook up and see what result I got, what mark he'd given me for my homework. I'd done a lot of smudging. He'd given me a B, and I remember getting really angry and telling my friend, like, I don't understand it, this is really good. Why am I only getting a B? And he walked in whilst I was saying this, and I was like, awkward. And he said to me, you need to learn the rules, Richard, before you start breaking them. And I remember being like, how dare you? This is an outrage. I know the rules. This, stormed off and a half, secretly taking note of that lesson that he taught me. You need to learn the rules before you break them. So, what if those rules are actually meant to be broken? And what if you don't need to learn them first? That's the thing about this stuff. For instance, what I'm doing here, there's a reason why I've got this shot. I've got the sun behind me. I'm being backlit. And admittedly, I can see that I'm actually quite nicely well lit from the reflection, probably from the reflection of my white door next to me. But this is a rule. Don't do that. Unless you've got strong enough lighting to counteract that, don't go backlit. You've got to look into you've got to have the light shining on you. It's like, what if that rule is meant to be broken? What if these rules of creativity are meant to be broken? And then you have to kind of look at all the rules that you subconsciously absorb. The kind of fallacy about writer's block and inspiration. I'm not feeling inspired today, so I'm not going to create. Rubbish. You've just got to create to feel inspired. Or you lift yourself out of the funk, whatever it is. But what are those rules that you are subconsciously following? When it comes to my music, the rules of creativity, for me, it's like, well, there's this sort of thing about mixing when you're working. You've got to be mixing. You've got to make sure there's headroom. You've got to make sure nothing's clipping. You've got to record in stereo. When you record in stereo with stereo paired mics, you've got to make sure they're equidistant apart. And I understand these rules. I understand why they're rules, but who cares? Sometimes that's what I just feel. I just feel like, who cares? I watch all these YouTube videos of these people doing that, what's it called, retention editing? I heard the name being bandied about, retention editing. I go, well, that's really cool. And I love the fact it does keep me watching, because even though it's just stuff like this, they're essentially recording one take. They've got all these flashing images and text whooshing around the screen. And the rules there are, you've got to keep your edits snappy to keep everyone focused. And I think, well, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe that rule I'm going to break. Because maybe the person who watches my videos doesn't care about fancy editing. Well, I assume they don't, because they've clicked on my thumbnail, and my thumbnail is clearly low quality video. There might be a part of you that cares about it, but I don't want to follow that rule. And I think that's the thing, and then you've got to look at the rules in your given medium, whether that's art, or your painting or photography, and look at the rules. There's so many rules in photography about composition, your rules of thirds. So your third's going down there and your third's going across and across, and then the points where they intersect, that's your sort of magical place for putting things in. But actually sometimes breaking those rules mean that the stuff you create has its own language and its own rule system. Like, you don't have to necessarily follow those rules. Admittedly, I realise that I'm doing that, and I've actually laid my... Oh, hi Stewie. I've laid myself into the focal point. Stewie. Yeah, we're going to get some cat-themed videos now going on now outside. Stewie's fan. This is my cat, Stewie. Say hi, Stewie. Meow. Little worse, this guy. Love him. Okay, right, where was I? Oh yeah, rules. Right, here we go. Let me just do this. Break those rules. Because actually sometimes when you break those rules, something magical happens. I was remembered by a friend of mine who's a cameraman in the film industry. He would always talk to me about, I wish I could remember the name of the director, but the director who would film scenes through a doorway, but the door frame would be partially obscuring the scene, which was kind of breaking the rules, really. But what it would make you want is you'd want to peer around. Why can't I see everything? And breaking those rules sort of pushes boundaries, but also it allows you to start finding your own rules, finding your own way of communicating, and finding your own way of expressing yourself and your art and your music and your creations. And also it's really fun breaking the rules. Not breaking the law, don't do that, but breaking the rules in creativity. What if someone's laying down those rules as a way for you to specifically learn to express yourself that is truest to you, and also for you to find your own visual or sonic language to carve your own niche, to carve your own space. You listen to some... Stu. You listen to some... Let me see if I can rearrange this. There we go. You listen to some music artists and you think, mate, they were groundbreaking. And there's the point. They were groundbreaking because they were breaking the rules or breaking the given norm. And that's the magic. We've got whole genres that grow out of people breaking the rules of existing genres. And think to yourself, how can I integrate this idea into the work I'm creating? How can I establish what rules there are and start to kind of try and break them? How can I start to push boundaries? For me, I've started to think less and less about the quality of my mixing. I know people already knew that I didn't really do that, but I remember reading an interview with it was Junkie XL, I forget his actual name, film composer. He was talking about running all of his channels hot, which means that they kind of go into the red because he likes the sound of digital clipping. I think, brilliant, great, that's amazing, and I do the same. I don't do it necessarily on purpose, but if it happens, I don't really care. When I studied at a college called the ACM, the Academy of Contemporary Music, one of the lessons, the gold dust lesson, I think, the golden gem for that study, was when one of the tutors was talking about songwriting. He was saying, the simplest songs should just be able to be as simple as possible. You don't need all these bells and whistles to have a good song. Otherwise you're just polishing a turd, which I've always loved that analogy. So think about those rules. What rules are you unconsciously absorbing, like on YouTube, posting once a week, doing retention editing, making your length certain, putting your hook in the right time and saying the right thing at the right time, all these rules. And yet there are YouTubers who don't follow those rules and still seem to do well, because they've found something that is uniquely them. And that's, I think, what creativity is about anyway. It's about finding a way to express yourself as closely to the real you as possible. And sometimes that means breaking the rules and pushing the boat out and breaking the ground, doing unusual things and exploring avenues that other people don't openly explore. I hope you enjoyed this little chat, and I hope it's helped you have a little bit of confidence to maybe try something new or pursue an idea that you thought was a bit, but here you felt it needs to be explored. You are awesome, and I'm really grateful that you've watched and listened to this, and I will see you in the next one.